So in this session, we're just going to talk about some recipes and practical ideas of things we can actually cook and make that are delicious, but also nutritious, and incorporate all the things we've been discussing in the other sessions that can contribute to improving our mental health. So my favorite meal of the day is breakfast, and I honestly could not get up and get out the house if I haven't eaten breakfast. And I know some people can go without, but I definitely need my breakfast. Definitely the most important meal of the day in this house. And one of my favorite things to make, which I think is a really nice way of including lots of the different aspects we've spoken about, is like egg muffins. I don't know if you've ever tried to make something like that, but you know, I've always got a batch in the fridge, so literally you can put any vegetables in there, use bits and pieces of leftover vegetables. I like to put mushrooms in there, spring onion, maybe a bit of pepper, basically anything you've got going in the fridge, even things that are a little bit past it. Chop them all up, fry them a little bit, and then I just take a muffin pan, which I just lightly grease, and you put your vegetables a little bit in each muffin hole, and you make a mixture of egg. You can add a little bit of milk in, but otherwise just egg. You can put a bit of cheese in there for flavor. I sometimes put some feta cheese in, which is one of my favorites. And then you pour the egg mixture over the vegetables, and you bake it for about 20 minutes ish. Yeah, and they kind of just come out as these lovely little sort of miniature quiches, I suppose, with loads of veg and goodness in. And what I love about them is you can pop them in the fridge. They probably, I'd say, about 3, maybe 4 days. They're still quite nice, and I can just take one out, sometimes reheat it in the microwave for not about 10 seconds, and it's just perfect. A really nice filling meal, you know, high in protein and loads of veg, and you're able to like use up, you know, a lot of bits and pieces in your fridge that you might otherwise end up throwing out. Spinach is another one I like to put in there. Yeah, just a really good way of using things up, and a nice filling breakfast.
And they'd be brilliant for a lunch or a packed lunch for school as well, wouldn't they? Because they're sort of really bite-sized, or for your kids when they get home for school and they're hungry, instead of diving for the bread bin, have something like that.
Totally, and they're just yeah, they you can have them cold. They're just as good cold. So yeah, really great for lunch boxes, and like you say, a nice healthy snack. Yeah.
So a breakfast that a lot of people tend to have might be things like porridge. And going towards the summer now, that might not be so appetizing, having a bowl of porridge when the weather's getting warmer. But something like overnight oats is a really easy thing to do. So I tend to get oat or milk. You can use milk or an alternative milk. Pop that in the bottom of maybe an old jam jar, that sort of size. A couple of tablespoons of oats, and then I might use some natural yogurt because it's live, got that good bacteria in it. And for some protein, I might add a spoonful of nut butter, so things like almond nut butter. You might put more nuts and seeds in there if you want to. And then maybe some frozen berries. I really like frozen berries because they're convenient. You've got no waste, nothing goes off, goes moldy, and you can just grab a handful and put it into those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can add things like chia seeds, hemp seeds, whatever you fancy, and maybe even a sprinkle of cinnamon. And you just want to make sure that the liquid covers the oats. You can put the lid on, pop that in the fridge overnight, and the oats will soak up all that liquid overnight. And if you're going to work, you've got that ready to go then. Or the kids might quite like that as a pudding or to have later on during the day. But that sort of thing's quite good.
Yeah.
Lunch-wise, I'm quite a fan of scrambled eggs. Again, it's quick and easy, and I sort of tend to liven mine up either with a spoon of rose harissa, which is quite spicy, and maybe a sprinkle of feta, like you said, because it's a great way of adding a little bit of salt
Mm.
and lifting the flavour of things.
Mm-hmm.
But even a teaspoon of pesto can
Yes.
in some
Yeah,
scrambled egg,
delicious.
really tasty.
Mm.
It just brings the changes. That's a really quick lunch.
Mm.
You can always add a little bit of a side salad to that, or if you've got more time, some grilled tomatoes or mushrooms, and that's rather nice.
And salads, I mean, I know they're you know, they don't always sound that interesting, but you know, you don't just have to have lettuce and tomato and cucumber. When you think of salad, you know, there's all sorts you could do. I love avocado, so I like to make a salad with, you know, rocket and cherry tomatoes or plum tomatoes, whatever I've got. Bit of mackerel. So I love the taste of mackerel, but equally you could put some beans in there from a can. You know, you get these mixed 3-bean salads. Add that. It just kind of bulks it up and just really makes turns your salad into a meal that's quite satisfying, I think. And yeah, it just fills you up, and you're able to put in a lot of nutrients and goodness. And like we spoke about before about eating a rainbow, just thinking about using vegetables in a salad. Again, you know, grated carrots, beetroot, and whatever you like to eat as well. Nuts and seeds, again, in a salad, absolutely delicious. Like a seed mix sprinkled over your salad is just lovely. So it just adds a bit of crunch, and again bulks it up, and you get your essential fats in there. So another good way of adding to it.
Yeah, I like making my own slaw. So I wouldn't quite call it coleslaw, but like you said, the grated carrot, things like either a red or white cabbage, the hard ones, slicing that up really finely, maybe some spring onions or red onions, things like coriander, maybe some fennel, a little bit of chili in there, and then herbs like coriander, but being really brave with those herbs because they're so full of nutrients as well, aren't they? Things like parsley is really rich in iron, but they pack a punch with flavour. And then using things like olive oil, maybe with some apple cider vinegar, maybe a squeeze of orange juice in there to get some flavours. And things like pomegranate seeds, they add an amazing burst of flavour. And literally you've got a rainbow, like you say, on your plate. And a big bowl of that would last, like the frittatas, several days in the fridge, won't it? So
I find, because I quite like things like butternut squash, when I cook something like butternut squash for the evening meal, I often leave some aside and you know, chop that into small pieces and put that in a salad, just a cold salad, that with things like feta and beetroot and some baby spinach leaves, just lovely, really nice flavors, and again, you've literally got a rainbow in your plate, so you know you're getting amazing good nutrients from that one lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that really helps, doesn't it? Cooking to have some leftovers for lunch the next day. Lunch doesn't have to be a sandwich.
No, absolutely not. No.
So if I've done a veggie curry, I'll do sort of a curry, and then I'll do a dal on the side, and then hopefully there's some left, like you say, for lunch the next day, which is always a bit of a bonus if you haven't got to cook it from scratch.
Yeah. And talking about dinners, like something like a curry or a dal, such again, quick and easy, cheap ways of you know, getting lots of goodness in. I quite like to make something with the kind of bases of tomato and red lentils, so can take the form of a soup or a stew or a curry. You know, you can experiment with different herbs and spices depending on what you like. Just a bit of onion, some chopped tomatoes from a can, and your red lentils in there, which are very easy to cook with, a bit of stock. And yeah, it's just a really nice, easy and cheap meal to make, and you know, full of nutrients, bit of coriander on the top, delicious. Yeah.
And it's not all about that, is it? It's sometimes having those treats as well.
Absolutely.
So, I think most of us have put a hand up and say we like chocolate.
Oh yeah. Too much.
One thing I've really enjoyed playing around with is making raw chocolate. So using either cocoa butter or coconut oil, and cacao powder. So cacao powder is that raw form of cocoa, so it's got much higher antioxidants and it's a little less bitter than cocoa. And I literally mix that up. So melt your fat, mix in a tablespoon or so of the cocoa powder, the cacao powder. I might put a pinch of salt, so like sea salt or Himalayan salt in there, and maybe a little bit of maple syrup just to sweeten it. And you mix all that together while it's still warm and pour it out over a parchment sheet. And then you can sprinkle it with nuts or, things like goji berries, but pistachio nuts and flaked almonds or coconut look fantastic over it. You can put some cinnamon in as you want, and then break it all up when it's cool. So you put it in the fridge or the freezer, let it cool, and then break it up. And that's really good. Another thing I do is like little protein balls. If you've got a food processor, it's really easy in there, using whether cashews or almonds, both of which you can get readily from supermarkets. Shove those in. Again, I might put a bit of salt in there. You can put other things like maca powder or superfood powders if that's your thing, but it doesn't really need it. I'd use coconut oil as the fat again, and I might use maybe 3 or 4 medjool dates. So they're the bigger, stickier, squishy ones, aren't they?
So they're great for sweetening anything like that, aren't they?
Yeah. So I think 1 date equates to about a teaspoon of sugar. So that's where you just need to be careful. And if you look at a recipe online, you might be able to pull back on some of that. And if you add cinnamon to food, any food, it will help it to make it taste sweeter, but the cinnamon actually has a therapeutic effect on your blood sugar levels. So it's a good thing to add. And what you do, you just whiz all that up in a food processor till it starts to come together. You might have to add a little bit more oil in there if it's too thick, and then mold it into balls. And then what I do is I either roll it around and cover it in desiccated coconut or more cacao powder. Pop them in the fridge, because especially if you're using coconut oil, it melts room temperature. Well, especially when it gets to summer. So pop them in the fridge or the freezer just to firm them up. And they're great because they're full of protein. They've got some relatively healthy fat in there. You've got your hit of chocolate, a little bit of sweetness. And if I use, say, 200 grams of nuts, that would probably give me about 10, well, probably nearer 20 balls. That sort of size.
And you think you can buy that sort of thing in the supermarkets, but have you ever had a look at the cost of some of them? They're really, really expensive sometimes. So yeah, being able to make a batch yourself, which is probably even more delicious, and you know what's going into it, and way cheaper.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would put them in a plastic container or anything else, pop it in the freezer, and you can eat them from frozen, but I have to hide mine from the children.
For the children, yes. Sure.
But a little bit of chocolate, especially when we're looking at the dark chocolate, can actually be quite good for you, can't it? Looking again at those labels, going for the darkest you can find, and your taste buds change. So, it might be a bit bitter to start off with, but the more you try it, the better it is. And it's high in antioxidants.
It
gives you that serotonin dopamine boost, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, a little bit of goodness of naughtiness is sometimes good as well.